Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 5-day program, which we're referring to as an AI Policy Summit. Before we dive into this very, very rich and complex domain, I want to make some remarks about a very urgent international unfoldment that's happening in Gaza, because I think all of us, whatever we believe or whatever sides we think have more rectitude than others, we need to all take in what's happening right now, today, as I speak, in Rafah. Rafah is a very small town on the southern extreme of Gaza, right against the Egyptian border. For the last 4 months, the Israeli military has been essentially carpet bombing all of Gaza from the north to the south, bearing in mind that Gaza is about 5 miles wide and about 25 miles long. Very small area, 5 miles by 25 miles, packed into which is about 2.2 million Palestinians, one of the most densely concentrated areas in the entire world, which has basically been a concentration camp for Gazans for the last 30 to 40 years. The original plan of the Israelis was to bomb from the north to the south so that the Palestinians would be forced out of Rafah into Egypt. That was the plan. The Egyptians, also the Jordanians, and the entire Arab world refused. And in that first trip that Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and then President Biden, when they went to Israel shortly after the Hamas attack on October 7th, that was what they were trying to negotiate. The release of Palestinians from Gaza through Rafah into Egypt to create a massive refugee camp. And that's one reason why the Arabs, for the first time in American history, refused to meet with an American president. That was their answer. The strategy didn't change. And so the Israelis have been bombing indiscriminately for the last 4 months. And now, in addition to the 200,000 inhabitants of Rafah, there's now another 1.2 million Gazans that are pressed down into that city, for a total of 1.4 million people concentrated in the southern tip of Gaza. There are many animals, by the way, lots of animals and pets that have been forced down with the people and now are huddling, completely congested, without food, without water, without sanitation, in Rafah in winter. And the Israeli army and Air Force is beginning the final desecration of Gaza. And we all just need to take it in that that's what's happening. It's a fact that more civilians have been killed in proportion to military in Gaza. More women and children have been killed per capita in the war against Gaza. And more children have been killed in the war against Gaza in the last 4 months than any conflict in modern history. Any conflict in modern history. In fact, I heard in the news today that more children have been killed in Gaza in the last 4 months than all the children in all the conflicts around the world in the last 4 years. And now the Israeli Defense Forces are mobilizing for the final bombing of Rafah. We cannot look away at this. This is a historical crime, not only a crime against humanity, it's a crime against history. This is like a second crucifixion. And our grief at what is happening needs to be expressed as a sacrament of kinship with the Palestinians. And so for as long as the Israelis are going to attack Rafah, I'm going to be talking about Palestine as I open up Humanity Rising every day. We cannot look away from what's happening. And we need to understand that it isn't just Israel. Israel is receiving the full backing of the United States. All the bombs that are being dropped say made in USA. So the complicity between Israel and the United States in committing genocide in Gaza needs to be consciously in our minds. And whatever we can do to stop it must be done before Rafah is completely destroyed and the final destruction of Gaza is complete. So thank you, everyone, for joining. These are sober times. I understand that. And yet, we also want to delve into other issues, as we will over the next 5 days, on artificial intelligence. In its own way, it's a challenge to human identity, human self-awareness, human capacity, human wisdom. And the attitude toward one sector feeds into our attitudes in other sectors. That the genocide in Gaza and the development of artificial intelligence are not disconnected. That's very important for us to bear in mind. These are serious issues that strike to the heart of what it means to be human. It's my pleasure now to introduce my very good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's been a pillar foundational pillar of Humanity Rising and needs no introduction, but has convened many sessions here on Humanity Rising and has a particular fascination with artificial intelligence. It has been convening along with Georg Bach our discussions on this subject. So Tom, I turn the program over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jim, for your sobering comments. I can't help but think about all of what's happening in Palestine and to the people is happening because the Palestinians aren't seen as human. And certainly, if we go back in history during the Holocaust, the Germans didn't hold the Jewish people as human. And when we look at some of the programs I've done on Humanity Rising around climate change and endangered species, there's a capacity that we have as humans to create a story, to create a way of being in the world, a perspective. And that's part of the reason why we want to have this series this week on artificial intelligence policy, is that there are fundamental questions that just aren't being asked. And there's a narrative that has been adopted and is being adopted that makes atrocities like what's happening in Gaza happen, makes what's happening with climate change happen. And unfortunately, when I look at what's happened with social media that's now celebrating close to its 20th birthday, social media was the equivalent of the atomic bomb dropped in Japan. And AI and what's being developed with artificial intelligence, particularly the potential for AGI, is the equivalent of a nuclear bomb as opposed to the atomic bomb. And it's a Promethean moment in human history. And our policymakers, and I look at Senator Schumer last year convening industry executives behind closed doors and having conversations around AI. And there was very little information that was leaked to the press, very little information made available to the general public. We see the technology companies very much adopting the strategy of big tobacco. And if tobacco wasn't enough of a negative impact on humanity, the move to vaping, where you've got concentrated amounts of tobacco and the impact that that's having, it's clear that we as a species just seem to be stuck in our development. And I've got a number of colleagues who've looked at, where is humanity in its evolution? And I think there's general consensus that we're adolescents, we're acting like adolescents. And the concern I have with regard to AI is we're unleashing a technology onto humanity without asking the basic question. So I'm absolutely delighted to have the series this week, and we're going to be exploring AI policy from a variety of perspectives. And I want to welcome Georg, who's been a great collaborator over the last year on AI policy and some of the discussions we've had. And I want to invite Jim back into this dialogue today. And our special guest and panelist, Michael Putz, is with us today. Michael's got an extraordinary background, both in his work with Ken Wilber in the early days on integral theory, as well as decades of work in the tech sector in Silicon Valley, and has a deep spiritual life as well. And so, Michael, welcome. Wonderful to have you with us today. And I suggest we go ahead and start with some of your opening thoughts, Michael, and some of the slides that you want to share with us. And welcome Jim and Georg into a wonderful conversation today to kick off this week.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you. Thank you, Jim. I think you've really set up the conversation here. It's hard to feel all of what's going on Just take that in for a minute. But I think it's critical for us to do is to ask ourselves, how can we make sure that the outcome of what we're doing with AI is different than what happened with social media? What's different with climate change? It's really critical to do that. And I want to say right off to begin with, I've really appreciated the AI series that you've helped put together here, Tom, on Humanity Rising and all the good policy work that's been discussed. And there is tremendous good work being done. And I think what's important for us to do is to say, how can we maximize the possibility of success that we're going to get this right, unlike social media? And I think part of that's going to be asking some questions that aren't asked enough, or maybe we don't want to talk about too much because they're a little bit uncomfortable. So I want to kick off the week by having an open discussion with the team. That's why we have Tom here and Jim and Georg to bring their perspectives. And I'm just going to try to facilitate a conversation about some big issues I think will help us do a better job of making the AI journey and its interaction with humanity more successful. So I'm going to go into a brief presentation. So. All right. Okay. All right. So for today's conversation, I sort of frame this as big questions being overlooked that are impacting AI policy. And I've used words like ontology, formation, and more just to say, want to open our minds to being something different. Ontology and formation are just sophisticated names for what does it mean to be human and how do we become human? But I just want to sort of jostle our minds and think about things differently, because we're really talking about creating a godlike technology. And I think that requires us wrestling with godlike questions. So that's how I like to frame the conversation today. So as Tom has said many times in the beginning and the end of his presentations, I think most recently a couple of months ago, the real central issue is around AI is that what does it mean to be human? We're going to be creating an intelligence that is going to be near human, maybe equal to human intelligence, perhaps surpassing it. I really don't have a position on that, but just if the current trajectory of technology and AI today keeps moving forward, there's not some kind of invisible barrier that keeps it at its current level, but we're going to have systems that are going to have some degree of intelligence, some degree of theory of mind, being able to understand us. Social media has been able to manipulate us through things like limbic capitalism, manipulating the bottom of our brainstem through fear and dopamine. But AI is going to be able to understand who we are, how we think, what we're wanting and needing. And that could be radically customized, which means that's a first in event in human history to have something looking at us and understanding where we're coming from and being able to direct possibly our values and how we grow or become formed as human beings. So, we already see applications of this for education, coaching, therapy, and companionship. And I think some people think this is wonderful and want to accelerate it as quickly as possible. Some people are concerned about it. But I think it's going to come in one way or the other. It's going to come in terms of people saying, this is what I want. Some people are going to say, this is a way to give access to important services like mental health services to people who may have no access or no income. So I expect to see these applications rolling out very quickly. And if AI technology keeps on improving, it's going to become less and less distinguishable in a virtual way from another person at the other end of the line. And so, we basically have a possibility that AI is going to be creating just as much of an influence as for young people, as parents or peers or teachers. So we need to have this AI and these AI platforms and applications. We need to make sure they have a fundamental understanding of what does it mean to be human? What is the nature of being? What are we here for? And then how do we then support human beings in thriving in the world? And so that's what ontology is about. What is the fundamental nature of our being? And formation is how do we help human beings grow to their full potential as they understand it? So this is something I think is really to sort of make this concrete. There's this wonderful organization called Apparent Selves. You can find them at apparentselves.org. And it's a wonderful organization of Buddhist researchers Buddhists and AI researchers, oftentimes together at the same time, that's working across from Nepal, United States, Europe, across the world. And they've got a grant from the Templeton Foundation, and they have some funders in Silicon Valley. And they're doing some marvelous research about how to bring the Buddhist ideas of compassion into AI systems. And what's interesting is that their fundamental point of departure here, and I'll show a brief video in a second, is that they're saying that Buddhism and AI researchers are starting from somewhat a similar point of view, which is they both believe they're creating virtual selves. Now, the Buddhist believes that our belief that we have an individual separate self is an illusion, that we all are in some ways one, right? The AI researcher knows that they're creating virtual consciousness. They know that's artificial at the moment. It's not embodied. It's not a person. But from that similar starting point, they have very divergent perspectives on where the future is. The Buddhist people here in the apparent selves debate really believe that they want to have AI help people understand that their separate self's an illusion. And that's the way to freedom. That's the way to compassion. That's the way to love and better relationships and peace in the world, as we were talking about earlier. And AI researchers are thinking, no, we want to amplify the ability of this artificial intelligence to have more consciousness, to identify as having a self, to have a theory of mind, to be able to set and also support human beings in augmenting their selves. We may say their ego, for example. And so that's a very divergent perspective on how research should be done. And they're both very valid perspectives. This important thing about this debate is that, or this conversation is to say, AI is going to force us to deal with issues that seem to be abstract, seem to be theoretical. But when we have a system that we can implement these ideas into, it has very concrete implications. Do we have a self or not? Is it the path to liberation to realize I don't? Or is the path to liberation is to be my best self, right? To amplify myself. So I think it would be good for me to basically just show a brief video here. This is an introduction from one of the founders of the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves.
And so hopefully there'll be something that everyone can benefit from. But why do we have such hopes? Why do we have such expectations that from bringing together AI and Buddhism? A lot of it has to do with an observation of a shared environment, you could say. A shared environment insofar as the Buddhist and the AI scientist is used to working among merely apparent selves, merely apparent individuals. From the perspective of Buddhist philosophy, the point that is argued is typically that there may be seeming individuals, there may be seeming persons who endure in time and who are in a position to control actions. But such appearances are just that. They are mere appearances and not evidence of any real self or any real person. That's somewhat similar to the AI context, because while AI may give an appearance of individuality and personhood, that everyone agrees is just an appearance and not evidence of a real individual present residing there in the intelligent network. So in that regard, we can say that Buddhists and AI scientists are used to operating on the same ground. But it is also interesting to note that the expectations that each one of them has differ. For the Buddhist, the more it can become clear to us that the appearance of self is mere appearance, the more intelligent we also become. So the growth and unfolding of intelligence is tied to the recognition of no self. And not only that, but also ethically and morally important qualities like care, the capacity to care for others, and take responsibility for all the apparent selves is, it is argued, tied to the recognition of the no-self nature of things. So that is different, quite radically different from the typical scenario in AI, where often the assumption is that the more we can amplify the appearance of self, the greater the expression of intelligence will be. Not only that, also the capacity of the intelligence system to make decisions that are morally relevant for us humans. That capacity will also be enhanced if the appearance of self can be enhanced, and perhaps one day even if genuine self-awareness can be engendered in the network. So while everyone is used to working among merely apparent selves, the Buddhist and the AI scientists have radically different ways of looking at the challenges and the promises of this ground reality. So that's what we aim to explore as we come together to learn from each other. Thank you very much.
So I thought that was a wonderful summation of some great, a very divergent perspective. So fundamental questions about reality, fundamental questions about what it means to be human, lead to very fundamental differences and conclusions about how AI technology should be developed to support human thriving. And so what I wanted to do here is, and this is what I want to bring Tom in with Georg and Jim, is just to ask a question here. What practical implications? Because I'll hear a lot about compassion. For example, I was at a Wisdom 2.0 summit. Wisdom 2.0 has been a Silicon Valley event that's been bringing mindfulness into corporations. And as a matter of fact, many of the Silicon Valley tech founders from over a decade ago, Facebook and Google, were serious meditators, some of the executives. And so it's a natural, a lot of these people grew up with Wisdom 2.0. So all the founders of these big tech platforms are part of this, and they had a special summit on AI. And the number one subject was, how do we build compassionate AI? But it depends on what is the difference in a future for compassionate AI between a no self world and an amplified self world. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to have a conversation here with the panel. What do you think about it, Tom and Jim and Georg?
Thank you, Michael. I think the first thing that came to mind is that we really got to figure out whether we should think about AI in a developmental fashion, developmental manner, or not. I remember back in the days when Ken Wilber wrote Boomeritis, this novel he wrote. And I think that was like in the 1990s or something. He made this pathetic vision of an AI developing, but developing in discrete stages of ego awareness. And one of the things that makes me wonder is, if we think of a no-self AI, do we first have an AI with a kind of nurtured, healthy self first, so that later can kind of peek into these states or stages of having no self? Isn't that a development and achievement of a self in the universe that unfolds later and needs to be kind of transcended?
Yeah, well, it's almost like the idea you have to have a self before you can transcend it, right? So does the AI need to go through the stages of ego development before it can transcend ego? It's a very fascinating concept, but that's wonderful. And as a matter of fact, we might talk about your question a little bit in a second about this developmental perspective. So Tom and Jim, what do you say?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I would echo Georg, and I think I would also add a note of caution about using AI for ideological purposes. If the Buddhists can teach, the non-self, then other traditions and other ideologies can use AI to push their ideologies, whether political or social or scientific. And if you just imagine a world of battling AI ideologies in the same ways that humans battle around ideology, you could have a catastrophic collision of machines and frenzied humans in that process. So for me, Michael, in addition to agreeing with Georg, and your point that the achievement of the non-self is at the highest reaches of the enlightenment process.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start teaching that from the top down, I wonder what unintended consequences in the activation of the shadow content would begin to emerge.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jim. Oops.
I've stopped sharing because people want to see us. They're complaining that.
There you go. So
Where
we're
are we?
disembodied voices.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Michael. And where I go is when I look at the people who are developing AI, some of them are believe that what they're developing is access to information.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them believe that they're developing augmented intelligence.
Mm.
Some of them believe that they're developing artificial intelligence. And some of them acknowledge that they're developing sentient beings, albeit silicon beings. And when we look at the tens of billions of dollars that have gone into this development, each of those investors certainly expect to get their money back. Each of them expect to create some kind of legacy for themselves, but there's not consensus about what's actually being developed and what are the implications of what's being developed. And I think that's the concern I've continued to raise. Jim, you've shared this, I've shared this many times. This is a Promethean moment in human history, and nobody's asking the question, what is fire? Why is it being brought? How is it going to get used? And what are the potential threats of fire when it's introduced to the world?
Yes, Tom. As a matter of fact, the founder, the CEO of Google has said that AI is on par with the invention of fire. So that would be pretty significant. So to Jim's point, I think it's really important. I think I don't want to speak for what the people at the Center for Study of Apparent Cells want to do. They're looking at the no self doctrine specifically around how to implement compassion. I don't know if they're trying to use AI to teach Buddhism to people versus using the doctrine of no self to then inform how compassion is implemented. And I think that's probably more accurate. I don't think they're proselytized through this. I don't know, but I think I just want to say that. I think I've met some of the people in the organ cells how to navigate this world, and then we must have we share with other people. They're going to have agency and maybe even in some ways agency over ourselves, right? In these future applications. So we don't have a choice. We have to build in the most inclusive, the most humanistic, the most intelligent set of values and principles into these systems. They're not value free. That's the problem. And so the problem is, like, for example, in social media, just like other tech revolutions, they're viewed as tools. And we let the people who create them develop these tools. And Tom and I were at the Wisdom 2.0 Summit. We saw Van Jones speaking, and he has a foundation where he's basically got over $100 million from Jeff Bezos and other major tech players to create an AI opportunity for marginalized people, right? So that it doesn't just go to rich people in the United States, so that everybody has a chance to learn AI skills and produce AI applications and benefit from what AI could bring to get the positive aspects of it. But he made a point of saying, looking at the audience, he said, I see a lot of 30-something male founders here. And so what developmental level and cultural perspective are they going to implicitly put into their products, right? Even in the best sense, are they including other perspectives? So somebody's perspective will be built into these systems. So the question is, can we have a conscious conversation about it and then seek a way to make sure that it's the most inclusive for everybody? But we do have to have a discussion about these values. We can't sidestep it. So,
if I could just interject a point here,
yes.
Michael, I think you're right. And I think to underscore what Tom said, that the challenge, whether it's the Buddhists or Van Jones or OpenAI,
Mhm.
is that all of us are running pell-mell ahead, thinking, oh, we'll just do what we want to do, whether it's helping marginal people or helping Facebook sell more products or whatever. No one that I know of,
Mhm.
no government, no international agency is saying, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the second coming of fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let us pause here. All of us, from the Buddhists to Van Jones to Silicon Valley, and spend 6 months in deep deliberation as a human community about the implications of this, because failing to do that, you get the law of unintended consequences. That's what happened with social media. I'm sure, Zuckerberg did not think at the origin of Facebook of anything like how Facebook has ended up. And it was precisely because he didn't think about it that he ended up in the mess. And last week, apologizing to the families of the world for the damage that Facebook has done to the children.
You just
So,
talked, yeah. You
so
talked about
we,
Gaza earlier.
we need to put up the red lights, folks. This is the second coming of fire.
You talked about how the linkages between Gaza and other events. You see the harm of children there.
Yeah.
You see the harm of children with Facebook, and the challenge is that absolutely. Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook when he was 20 years old, right? So what kind of? It's most of us would have no clue at 20 years old, right? But the problem is when he was 30 years old, when they leaned into what they knew was going on the last decade. They didn't know what they created, but they leaned into the Frankenstein they did create. And then they made excuses for the last decade. And that's a tragedy it's horrifying. And so I think what the good news is that the scarring experience of social media has raised awareness among every stakeholder. So there's been a lot of proactive attempts to immunize AI from the worst parts of social media, government's mandates, the EU's working on regulations. The concern I have is that for all of the incredible efforts, it's in the news all the time. Biden puts out AI guidelines, and the major companies like OpenAI are asking for regulation, right? But that makes me suspicious. Be careful, right? When they're asking for regulation. But people are trying to immunize AI from the excesses of social media, but I don't think they're going far enough. And I think that's the point of the conversation today.
Yeah.
And so I liked Georg's point about developmentalism, your points about that we have to understand all these different ideologies. We don't want battling ideologies. And so I think that leads into the next thing I want to show here. I'll go back to screen sharing if I can. Next step here. So I think that we've sort of gone into this a bit, but there's other fundamental questions which we don't have time to discuss today. But basically, is there a mind-brain distinction? Is the mind just an epiphenomenon of neural activity, or is the mind separate? Strict materialism versus the soul. To your point about we wouldn't want to put in an atheistic perspective or a Buddhist perspective. Right now, when we talk about that apparent selves conversation, the the Buddhist and the strict materialist can both agree, come from a very different perspective, that the idea of a soul is certainly questionable, if not doubted completely, right? And there are a whole other set of religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and many others who believe in a central role of a soul and a self. right? That's independent of the brain of the body. And that's when if you meet most AI researchers and most AI corporate leaders and you hear what they say and their values, they certainly support humanism. They may support a version of Judeo-Christian values, but they don't really necessarily believe in a soul. And so the question is, that's a very difficult conversation to have. But right now, I think that the only thing I can really recommend is that just like the Center for the Study of Apparent Cells is trying to understand the interface between their views of reality and AI, I think we need to see more of these efforts for different cultures, different viewpoints in the world. And I don't see enough of that happening. I don't really. I've seen Christians and engage with AI and talk about how it could be used or how it could be shaped, but not at the fundamental level that we're talking about, right? And I don't think there's a real understanding of how AI could fundamentally reshape our understanding of ourselves in the world, and it's not being engaged with. So back to Georg's comment about developmentalism, right? What I think is really important here is that, as I mentioned earlier, that these applications are going to be used in education, coaching, therapy, companionship, and in some ways they're going to become in the background, like the water we swim in. We're going to end up just in absorbing values, just like we observe our parents or we watch our peers and we learn values from them. And AI is going to be part of our lives, and we need to make sure that they're programmed in with the right kind of values and perspectives. And so, to your points earlier, we need a robust, inclusive understanding of what it means to be human and how to support all people on their unique journeys. And I think part of that process is having a developmental model. And then Georg, I know Humanity Rising, not everybody in this on this session today has probably heard all the other previous sessions, but I understand that you've had many conversations about Ken Wilber's developmental framework, about developmentalism and integral model in previous sessions. So probably a lot of the people have heard this, but I can't assume everybody has. But I want to talk about Robert Keegan. He's a professor at Harvard, and he's had a constructed developmental model. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that if people may have heard about Piaget, Piaget was a early childhood researcher looking at childhood development over 100 years ago. And he realized that there seemed to be a universal process in young children where certain capabilities emerged for concrete operational thinking, for abstract thinking. And it was a cross-cultural reality that there was certain transformations of mind where a complexity of mind emerges over key milestones in children, typically like 7 to 8 years old or in the adolescence period, and that our educational processes are based around the recognition that certain capacities in the mind develop over time that are not present. They weren't present before, now they're present. And the constructed developmental model Keegan had, I think I'll just sort of summarize it here he mentioned that what the goal of the average modern adult is what he calls the socialized mind, which is the ability to be able to work in a network of relationships with people. And there's a certain complexity of mind necessary to do that, which is concrete operational thinking. And so what the socialized mind, what he observed is that when someone has a level of complexity that allows the socialized mind, the person is defined by the relationships they have in the world with their peers, with authority figures, with their families, with their bosses. What is interesting, he said he wrote a wonderful book called In Over Our Heads in 1994, The Demands of Modern Life. And that book, which I highly recommend, he wrote it in 1994. It's just an amazing look forward from the past and also look forward to the future. He basically said that modern life was putting more and more demands for people to be able to navigate complexity, navigate autonomy. And he said that there seemed to be an implicit demand in society that people had to manage their careers, manage their finances. Whereas before you could have thought, well, I'll grow up in a family, I'll go to school, I'll get a job, I'll work for a corporation for 30 years. That mindset was disappearing in the 80s and 90s. And he observed the fact that modern life was saying you need to be an autonomous figure who can navigate your own life, no longer depending upon the structures of tradition or the structures of a corporation. to guide your decisions in life. And he called that the self-authoring mind. And he had already observed that he thought a significant part of the population had already adopted those set of values because of cultural changes and technological changes in the 70s and 80s. He wrote his book in 1994. And what's the difference about the self-authoring mind is a person no longer is embedded in relationships. They have relationships and they navigate and pull together a coherent sense of self through a self-constructed identity. I have these values and I decide how to integrate my faith, my family, my corporation. I decide. Whereas in a socialized mind, the person is trying to fit in with a set of embedded values that they absorb. The self-authoring mind has the ability, the capacity to create an identity that synthesizes and integrates multiple different relationships into a coherent whole. And he was basically saying that the modern world, the advanced sort of informational society and the great complexity he saw emerging in the 70s and 80s was sort of demanding a self-authoring mind. And his comment was, which was really important looking from the past till today, he was saying that our educational institutions and cultural institutions were doing a poor job of supporting people in developing self-authoring minds. Oftentimes, the school system sort of got them to a socialized mind stage and then said, good luck, go figure it out yourself. Now, a lot of times, the formation of a person, the idea again, people are being formed by their culture, by their school system, by their parents. And then, sort of, for example, parents who have college-educated, children of college-educated parents who may be very successful, they're being socialized into the self-authoring mind, right? But other people may not have that ability or those opportunities to be socialized into this, and oftentimes they're being left at the curb. Now, that's 30 years ago. I think that things have changed. I think you would find more people, these are numbers that are 20, 30 years old, more people would be in the self-authoring mind stage. But there's limitations to the self-authoring mind. There's limitations in terms of there's a fixation around identity. Someone may develop an identity that's very fixed, and we're in a world full of change, rapid change and paradox. And to deal with rapid change and paradox, he was saying we need really something like the self-transforming mind. And for people who have heard Ken Wilber's integral theory, it's often synonymous with the first beginnings of the integral stages that Ken Wilber talks about in the self-transforming mind. And that person's able to have multiple identities. They're able to hold paradox much more comfortably. Now, it's not about a desire or a will. Keegan was basically saying there was a developmental sequence of inner complexity of how someone forms their ego or someone understands their worldview. There's a developmental process where this is possible. It doesn't mean it happens. Just because I have the intellectual hardware to have a self-authoring mind doesn't mean I'm going to do it. I may stay in the socialized mind stage. That's totally appropriate. It's not my business to tell you what to do or anybody else to tell me what to do. But what he's trying to say is that when these capacities emerge, you look at a population of people, you tend to see when someone develops this level of intellectual complexity, they tend to take on these kinds of values and then these kinds of these ways of looking at themselves in the world at a population level. And so it's interesting as we go into 2024, we see the massive complexity and the challenges we have in the world. It's clear that this world is asking us to take in a lot of change, a lot of paradox, a lot of velocity of change. And higher order stages of mind are going to navigate those changes more effectively. It doesn't mean we mandate these things. It doesn't mean that someone's wrong or bad for being in any one stage or deciding to grow or not to grow. But it's very clear that when Keegan wrote this book, he was saying the society 30 years ago was sort of saying our model of success is a self-authoring mind. And a lot of people weren't being supported in that journey. And how does this relate to today? How it relates to today is that we're asking people to navigate even more complexity, and I think with even less support than was when Bob Keegan wrote the book in 1994. We're asking people to navigate this incredible complexity. And I think Jim and other people here have been if you listen to Humanity Rising, there's so many different things, climate change and cultural awareness and thinking about indigenous people and being intersectional issues. My goodness, that's a lot to be able to navigate this and incorporate it, and then be a leader of other people to help usher them through their journey of life. We need to we need to have we need to have this intellectual capacity in ourselves. So the question is, AI is going to be part of the process of augmenting our intelligence or developing our intelligence, our capacities, our morality, our compassion. Well, which form of mind are we building in? Now, we talked about, hey, the no self mind. Now, let's say something no self mind. If people know about Ken Wilber's model, there's many stages. No self is beyond all of this, right? This is about ego development, right? No self is way beyond all of this. It's a higher order stage. But that is where the question is, whose idea of developmental stages is being built into the system? Does it have a native understanding of developmentalism in it? Understanding that if I, my 20-year-old self or 30-year-old self, I was in an earlier stage of development, does the AI recognize that and be able to translate these principles that the AI system is trying to teach me about compassion or wisdom into my developmental stage and support me in my journey? Or does it try to talk over me or try to tell me I should be something I'm not? The challenge here is not that higher is better, right? It's not here to tell what people's values are, but do we have an AI system that recognizes, as Georg says, that people are on a developmental journey? They're going to be at different places in their lives. On that journey, can we support them, recognize them, value what their perspectives are, not look down on them? For example, someone who's at a higher stage of development looks at those previous stages of development and goes, oh my God, I'm glad I'm not like that anymore. But oftentimes, as they say, pulls the ladder up and doesn't acknowledge or support people in saying that there's not a recognition of, therefore, that was I earlier. I had an earlier stage of more literal understanding of reality, and I have a more self-authoring mind, a self-transforming mind. Does the AI system recognize who I am? Does it recognize my journey and support me? Or does it ignore it completely or try to impose the worldview of a specific stage of development through its AI system? Right? As you said before, the ultimate one would be, hey, let's go for no self. Like, well, that's pulling the ladder up and leaving everybody behind, because like there's a tiny fraction of people who are ready for no self to do that. So this is not necessarily a problem, but it's a perspective we have to build into the system to really, from a developmental perspective. So now I know Joshua Bach was on the broadcast here in Humanity Rising Day 806, and he was, I think, just a brilliant speaker. I think he just was just an amazing speaker. And what he did here, in this video, I found out, I was thinking about this talk, and I just pulled up this video, and voila, I found out that Joshua Bach was talking about Robert Keegan. I was just amazed, right? And he basically said, if people have talked about the AI alignment problem, which I know has been discussed quite a bit here. How do we align AI with human values so it doesn't go off and, take over the earth or do something we didn't intend? What Joshua said was that a lot of the debate about the AI alignment problem is because people are coming at it from a different developmental perspective. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And I could play a clip here for a second, but basically, I'll just sort of summarize it. Basically, Joshua was saying that there's certain people who are concerned about right versus wrong. And he said there's another group of people who are concerned about true versus false. And there's another group of people who said, like, this is just a developmental journey, right? And I begin with right versus wrong. How do I fit in? What are the correct values? We talked about the socialized mind. Then there's the self-authoring mind, which is usually a more scientific, more rational perspective. It's concerned about scientific facts. Is it true or false? What does the data say? And there's a higher level of perspective, which is, look, those are just different ways of viewing the world that emerge over time. There's many different perspectives we need to integrate, the more of the self-transforming mind, right? And you get very different perspectives on what AI alignment means, what AI policy should do, and what are the primary concerns. What are the perspectives you need to build into the system, and what are the concerns you need to look for? So I recommend looking at this video. Joshua's a brilliant man, but I was just stunned that he just threw this idea out. And what's interesting is that his conversation partner, he just was like, oh, whatever. What is that stuff? What is this developmental stuff? He just sort of very brilliant man. Connor's a very brilliant man. He's quite a well-run AI researcher, and we need to engage these difficult questions, and we need to engage a developmental perspective, because it really is true that people whose primary worldview and self-sense is at different developmental levels will see the problem from a different perspective and have different concerns. So,
well, Michael, I want to jump in.
yes, yeah.
Kim Kerrigan put a question or a comment in the chat, and her observation was, we're in over our heads.
Yes, that's we're in over our heads. And so the couple of things I wanted to say here is that are we building AI systems that are developmentally aware, right? Do they understand the developmental perspective and needs of people at every different stage? I don't think they do, right? I think what's happened is this is implicit, So my comment, if you watch the interaction that Connor and Joshua had, is that Joshua was like, well, you clearly could see where his mind was coming from. He was coming from a higher stage perspective, where basically there's a certain stage of development where you understand all of these stages are I'm not better than, these are all existent within me. This is my journey. This is who I am. And all of them are important. All of them are special. But before that recognition occurs, there tends to be a view of my developmental level is correct and everybody else's is wrong. And that's very dangerous if people have that perspective and implicitly are designing it into their AI systems. So I think it's critical that we build AI systems that support everybody wherever they are on their journey and value their contributions to support them wherever they decide to be on their developmental journey and what their value systems are. And I'm also concerned that AI systems need to be audited for developmental bias as well as cultural bias. So in conclusion, I'll just sort of say here at the bottom, the Center for Study for Apparent Cells is a great start, but so much more work's needed. We need to have other people's perspectives. We need to have other people investigating from their worldview perspectives, their religious values, their ideas of what human beings mean, to engage AI and surface these issues before it becomes too late, before we get too much in over our heads. So,
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. And I'm hoping over the course of the week we can start to ask and address the question through the conversations. Humanity is in over its head, and what do we do about it? How do we create the pause that Jim was speaking to earlier? How do we slow things down? Is it even possible, or is it too late? Jim, Georg?
Yeah, I want to take it a step further. In my view, Michael, I think the world is way beyond Keegan.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're way beyond holding contradictions and the self-transforming self and working interdependently. We're at the end of history. Our species is facing extinction. We're committing genocide on live TV.
Mm-hmm.
We're unleashing artificial intelligence without even pausing to ask a question, except on small little networks like Humanity Rising. You should be on national television, man. You shouldn't be on Humanity Rising. So I think we've come to a point where the Keegan categories have to be reframed beyond contradiction and beyond the self-transforming kind of ego and these neat intellectual categories. We're down to Viktor Frankl in Auschwitz, man.
Mm-hmm.
When that guy entered into Auschwitz and he realized that every category that he had been exploded. And it was not until he reconnected, knowing that his pregnant wife was in the camp, but completely separated from him. that what began to incubate in his soul in that extremis was the simplicity of love. And I think in all the categories of Ken Wilber, and I'm a Wilberian to my core, and all the categories of Keegan, that didn't help us from getting to where we are. And so for me, the developmental model is sort of left behind with the 20th century. And we need to kind of rethink things in a much more fundamental what is meaning now? What existentially does meaning mean with genocide in Gaza? What existentially does meaning mean with artificial intelligence and the projection of biological intelligence into silicon? What happens to all of our categories, man? So I just wanted to say that because I was feeling this pressure cooker building up within me as you were doing your size. And I was thinking, wait a minute, we're out of that box, man. So anyway, I just want to share.
I can't agree with you more, Jim. It's like it sounds like a cliche, but it's, without love, this doesn't matter, right? Without love, without the deep transformation, and also, if I could have tipped my hands, without recourse to the soul, all right? But however you may understand the soul, I'm sorry, I believe there's a self, and I believe there's a soul, and I think it's critical to basically center ourselves around love and a self that's based on the soul. Now the challenge is that we have to interface with the world. And as you talked about before, we don't want to have an AI system that teaches no self-Buddhism versus teaching other ideologies, no matter whether we agree with them or not. But I really sort of, I am a little bit discomforted about talking about developmental work. But the problem is that, Jim, is that without having that framework, I see that people don't even have dialogue. I see people,
and I agree with that too.
I see that people, my reason to bring this up is saying we were in over our heads and we said, like, we don't want to talk about that subject, Jim, because either it makes us uncomfortable or it's beside the point. You're saying it's beside the point. The world's falling apart. We need radical love, right? It's almost like Jesus coming into the Roman Empire. It's broken. He's this totally different set of values, right? It's not traditional solutions. The Christ over the lay of the Roman Empire was like, I'm here to say something totally different. No, we can't fix this system, is what you're basically saying. The problem is that we still have to work with the system too. So we need to do both.
Also true.
Yeah. So I think the both and so I wasn't going to give a speech about love today in this presentation in the soul.
The only thing left to talk about, man.
Exactly.
Well, just to jump in there, guys, I have a fun nugget on developmental stages and them speaking differently about love. So this weekend, I bought this book, which I thought was just a great idea. It's Thich Nhat Hanh for children. It's this, it is with colorful images. And I read through it and oh my God, this is so great. I'm going to read this to my kids. One is 6, 2 daughters, one is 6, the other one is 3, right? The one with 3 I knew, okay. She's just going to look at the images, but the 6th one, she likes complicated stories, okay? So I was reading these aphorisms that were like easy language, it was so well put. And like this small like paragraphs, on what's the meaning of life? What do I do if somebody bullies me? Or like relevant questions to children. And my daughter looked at me like totally like, I don't understand anything you're telling me. I understand the words, but I don't understand. Like she was in over her head. It was developmentally inappropriate. This book was not right for her, even though the language was making sense. But if you're at the right developmental level, you would have understood this book as a profound transmission of some type of love, right? But only if you're able to grasp it. So this just to connect these dots here, right? What kind of education material we want AI to produce? It needs to be able to understand what we are able to receive on the other end as well, right? So yeah, it's my
Yes. Thank
what came
you.
to mind.
That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
great story, Georg. Great story. I understand the words, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they love like stuff like
That's
Hansel and
developmental.
Gretel,
Yeah.
the fairy tales. It's concrete operational stories. Two people go there. They don't have internal conflicts. They have external conflicts. Something bad happens, you know. This is what is appropriate. And yeah, we don't have a session on Friday on kids in AI, you guys, but I just had to say it at this point because we're talking about Buddhism and developmental stages and understanding of care and love. And so I think we do need a developmental model, but I was also deeply touched by what you said, Jim, that this feels also a bit antiquated to some extent. And yeah, maybe it's because we all, you know, we're don't have a center of gravity that makes much sense. We're all over the place. On good days, we might be able to grasp this paradox. And then all of a sudden, on a bad day, we fall down and it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Right.
Right. So that's the idea of being able to create the capacity to receive is so important, what you said. And
Mhm.
I think that, there's the word privilege is used a lot, but there's a lot of, there's a privilege of there's a privilege of education and opportunity, but also age here in terms of being able to receive these things, and we have to understand that people are in different places to receive things that, the universal message is received differently. And these AI systems, I think, need to acknowledge that.
Well, Michael, thank you for helping us launch this week on AI policy and really getting at the core questions that just aren't being asked, aren't being addressed. It feels in some ways that it's intentionally these questions are not being asked, and certainly there are folks who don't want the questions asked. There are others that it hasn't occurred to them, and so I just want to honor and thank you for helping frame the week as we explore AI and AI policy. Tomorrow, we're going to be joined by Eddie Pyrek, who's just back from Davos, and I'm particularly curious to hear what he witnessed, what he saw happening in Davos
Wow.
in the context of AI policy.
Michael, I'd love to just ask you a quick question. Is there any group that you know of in Silicon Valley or in the government or in the corporate sector that is actually grappling deeply with these issues? I know that many of us, and Georg, you were the one that sent it, that conversation that Steve Wozniak hosted about a year ago with the guy that did The Social Dilemma. I forget his name.
Tristan Harris.
Yes,
Tristan Harris. Is Tristan Harris
absolutely. So Tristan Harris is,
engaged at this level, Michael? Who's out there that's really thinking at your level?
well, don't call it my level, please, but let's say,
I mean,
say
at a
Tristan,
deep level, at a
yeah,
deep level.
yeah. So Tristan Harris, he's just, everyone has probably heard The Social Dilemma, that there's a video, but he also did a presentation about this,
Yeah.
but something called the AI Dilemma. It was a presentation he's done in March of last year. And also he's repeated many times. You'll find Tristan Harris and AI Dilemma in different forms, and just look for the most recent one, but they're all good. He's basically, and he's been engaged. He was in Senate hearings. He was with the White House with the major corporations. So Tristan has built a very visible platform for himself. He's been in the conversation, speaking to the highest levels. However, there's only so much he can do, right? And there's only so much perspective. And I would say some of the perspectives you have are not, I don't know him privately. I don't know what his personal beliefs are, but his public advocacy are for the most critical issues, right? The most critical issues right now around AI safety and alignment that are very visible. I don't think these ontological and formation questions are on his radar right now. That doesn't mean that he's not seeing them or thinking them, but his the public advocacy is that, the house is on fire, right? Let's make sure that we, for example, get some regulations in place for safety, right? The focus has been on safety. The focus has not been about, it makes sense. First, safety, right? Do no harm. Then we have to focus on maximum thriving. And then, and how do we develop a model that supports greater consciousness and love, right? I think that's down the road. So to answer your question, Tristan Harris and the AI Dilemma is focusing on AI safety, trying to make this as useful as many people as possible. But I don't think it's dealing with the questions of in over our heads, and it's not dealing with the questions of ultimate love and concern and compassion yet. Doesn't mean he's not thinking about it, but I'm not aware of it.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And I've looked around and I've seen like some of the traditions. I know there's been a lot of focus on bringing indigenous perspectives in. So there's a lot of work on that, as well as marginalized communities perspectives in. I haven't seen the traditions, the great traditions like Islam and Judaism, Christianity, for example, that are incarnational. I don't see them having a major role right now. Not that I could be ignorant of that, and somebody can maybe help educate me about that. But I've been looking. I have not seen it. So I think there's a lot to be done.
Yeah. And is this a major focus of your attention? Because I know you've got a very diverse
Right.
portfolio and background. Is this just an academic interest on your part, or are you, like Tristan Harris, really digging in?
The challenge is even sometimes framing the conversation, Jim, as you know, sometimes is the first step, right? And Tom and I have been talking about this for a year now. Tom has been doing efforts with you in Humanity Rising on AI, and we've been talking. There's people who are trying to create funding for policy institutes to do this kind of work. Money's required to do these things, as you know, right? So I've been exploring this on my own, but also looking at there are avenues to basically create institutes, just like the Center for the Study of Apparent Cells. We need to have focused resources to do this kind of work. It can't be done in a vacuum. So yeah, I've done my own work in this area, but there's much more needs to be done. And so I hope this will surface some people. Some people will start thinking about this for themselves. Maybe we'll connect up with other people will inform us that these other perspectives are already being explored. They're not visible to us. That'll be really wonderful, good news to find out.
Brilliant. Well, you've certainly made us think today.
Thank you. And you do that every
Made
week.
me almost jump out of my seat.
Yeah, that's what your job every week. That's what this Rising is about, right? So,
yeah. So, Tom, do you want to have any more questions or comments, or you want to tee up tomorrow and wrap?
Yeah, just a big thank you again, Michael. It was fun spending the last week in conversations, helping frame today's conversation and making sure that we're setting off the week on the right way of thinking about AI policy. As I mentioned before, Eddie Pyrick will be back with us again tomorrow, fresh from Davos, and to provide us with some updates on how he's approaching the need for AI policy and compassionate and ethical AI. So it'd be great to have him back with an update about the work he's been doing in the last 6 months. And then to the audience, just thank you for being with us today, and looking forward to a very rich conversation this week on parenting in AI and compassionate AI, and frankly, can we have ethical AI in the capitalistic system that we're operating in around the world? So it's going to be a rich and fascinating conversation this week. So thank you all.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Georg, and thank you, Michael. This has been very rich and dimensionalized, and we deeply appreciate it. That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after chat. You'll see the link for the after chat in the chat box. You also received it in your Zoom reminders for today. And then tomorrow we'll embark on day 2 of our 5-day program on artificial intelligence. And we'll also continue to bear witness in grief for the unfolding events in Rafah. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. See you tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Thank you.